It's just the way I can't keep you honest like you're coming clean. It's just the way you seem to be addicted to leaving me. It's just the way now that I can't sleep at night. Now that you're gone, it's just the way you don't know which direction I was coming from. It's just the way I can't seem to tell apart all that.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me talking? Oh, I'll be back in just a moment. I forgot to turn my air conditioner off. There we go. Now you'll be able to hear my my keyboard clicking. Okay, the stream background today. Can't tell you a bloomin' thing about it because it came in a concept art folder marked unknown, and the images themselves don't have any markings on them that say anything at all. So so that is an unknown age. I'd love to know what their plans were for that particular place, but let's see if let me Here's another image from that same folder. It looks like they did actually go as far as to make a model of it. It's amazing how you can make just about any alien drink in the world with milk and a drop of food coloring. Okay, let's go ahead and put up the game window. Fauna, you can enlarge your chat by going into the key and then to the settings, and then there's a slider here for font size. Okay, it's just about time to begin. As you are undoubtedly aware by now from the announcements, Murfak Mirabat is not available this weekend. He won't, or I should say this month, because of an unexpected trip he had to make for a couple of weeks. That means that the tour that we were going to conduct today has been postponed until next month, which means you get to wait another month to find out just what that tour was. And then the decision to go ahead and hold a tour at all was made by Susan, who announced it at the All Guilds meeting before I had actually told her whether or not I was going to do so. So I kind of got locked into things, and then Susan contacted me a few days ago to let me know that she was bailing because of other plans. So today it's just me. Okay, let's see. Today we're not going to be going anywhere, so pull up a section of floor and have a seat, because we're only here in the game so that everyone can chat. I'll be conducting the entire tour over the stream. And since, as it turned out, there was actually several things that I had already done, but not covered in the tours, related to the new content that was released by Cyan, I believe it was last month. And that means that we actually have 2 ages that I want to cover today that never made it into the game. And let's see. The first age that we are going to be covering is Datahmnay. And let's see. I'm trying a new trick today, so we'll see if this works. Sorry, I know what happened. What happened is that I had switched to a different set of things, and that means that I didn't set up my microphone over there. So let me go ahead and do that now. Okay, you should be able to hear me now. And let's see. Hee hee. That's a little larger than I need to be. Okay. There we go. You should be able to hear me now, right? I'm trying out a new mode with my broadcasting software and didn't realize that I had to set up everything that I was going to use for each iteration of it that I'm trying. Okay, anyway. Let's go ahead and switch to that, and there we go. Okay, now, hold on for just a sec. Somebody sent me a PM. Okay, so we should be good to go. When Datahmnay was founded, the only source of light they had was a bioluminescent algae that Renaref wrote into the age. It glowed brightly for 15 hours and then gradually decreased in brightness to transition into a period of relative darkness for another 15 hours. This simulated the day-night cycle of their world of origin, Datahmnay. The light from the algae was enough to get around on the lake and river system inside the caverns, but the population couldn't always be near the water, and their activities didn't stop at the end of the day when the algae dimmed. To provide living and working space, the Datahmnay also had to dig tunnels and chambers in the rock around the residential and industrial caverns because there wasn't enough space to build very much in the open. This resulted in the majority of the living and working space consisting of excavated chambers. Since the algae wasn't enough, an artificial source of light was needed. Fortunately, the Datahmnay had one. It's unknown if it was invented early in Datahmnay history or if it was brought with them from Datahmnay, but the Datahmnay had knowledge of a substance that provided clean, efficient energy. It's unknown what the Datahmnay called it, but the DRC dubbed it either marbonium or marborium, depending on which notes are read. Marbonium could be combined with other substances and molded into spheres that made the marbonium stable. They made two kinds of spheres out of it. One was a ball a little larger than a man's hand, which you can see in the picture that I have up at the moment. That ball is safe to handle, but when connected to a machine, it provides a large amount of energy. Enough energy that they could power massive industrial machines with just one of those balls. The power balls had a fairly short lifespan when used, but could be stored for very long periods. The power ball that you see the avatar holding in the photograph was providing energy to the Datahmnay tunnel drilling machine in that picture. That machine is called a worm, which I believe the Datahmnay word for is ucha. The other type was a transparent sphere that emitted light in various colors depending on the marbonium quality and where it was mined from. That type of sphere was called a dakotam, which means fire marble. Fire marbles couldn't be used to provide power to the machines the way the power balls did, but in return, they had a lifespan that could be measured in centuries. Fire marbles were typically mounted in lamps, helmets, or sometimes in hand torches. Since they were cool to the touch and posed no fire danger, They were the default light source used in the Datahmnay Empire. In the picture that I'm currently showing, you see a collection of fire marbles showing the range of colors that they come in. White is the most common color and provides the best light. The linking book to the age of Datahmnay was discovered on September 26th of the year 2000. Investigation of the age was suspended a few days later by Dr. Ikaro Kodama, the DRC's chief engineer and expert in geology and structural integrity. The DRC members were interested in restoring Datahmnay. If they could have reinstated the manufacturing of fire marbles, it wouldn't have been just useful in the caverns. They might have been able to make a profit selling them on the surface. With that in mind, they began to survey the age. It didn't take long to discover just how hostile it was, and plans for restoration were suspended in September of the year 2000. The age was not revisited before the DRC shut down the caverns due to lack of funding. In the year 2006, after having secured a financial backer, the DRC returned. As part of their renewed efforts, they took another look at Datahmnay and voted to continue the suspension. Again, it was due to a recommendation by Dr. Kodama. On August 12th of 2006, he wrote a note that read, "Simply don't have the manpower. Recommending suspend, Dr. K." The caverns were closed a second time, since their backer had cut their funding before anything more could be done. The word Datahmnay is a contraction of Datahmnay, which means fire marble root, literally. In this case, the word root implies a source of something. Datahmnay is an age that was written by an unknown writer for the Guild of Miners to produce the materials needed for power balls and fire marbles. The world is said to have a very long day and night. Physically, the age is made up of an icy sea. And I'll switch to a map of the place. The sea is set in what might be a huge meteor crater. Running across the middle of the age is a low mountain range. The mountains formed over a tectonic plate boundary, and the mountains are where the plate is being pushed upward by convergence with another plate. The collision causes volcanic activity below the surface. The heat generated by that activity is high enough to make the mountains much warmer than the sea around them. The sea is surrounded by virtually impassable cliffs that may be the edge of the meteor crater. The map shows the age as it was when the DRC surveyed it. The holes are the locations of mobile drilling rigs that were left in the age when Datahmnay fell. Marbonium had to be harvested from the depths of the sea, which are incredibly cold and deep. After being collected, it needed to be fused with another substance to stabilize it and release the latent energy it contained. The fusion required extremely high temperatures like those of a blast furnace. The process is described as extremely complicated, although no details are known of how it was done. The surface of the sea was called the tundra, and was a no-man's land where anyone could go, but which was equally deadly to all. There were fast-flowing rivers filled with great icebergs cutting through the surface. Electrical storms blasted the tundra with chunks of hail larger than a man. Datahmnay records mention that there were rumors of gargantuan mammoth-like creatures somehow living in that frozen hell, but no images of one have been found. When speaking of the climate of Datahmnay, warm was a relative term. Temperatures on the tundra could fall as low as minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The mountain range had temperatures that ranged between 0 degrees to 32 degrees, again Fahrenheit. Because of the extremely low temperatures, the ice atop the sea wasn't made of water. It was mostly made of various frozen gases. The exact composition of the ice isn't known, but notes hint that the sea itself contained frozen hydrogen deep below the surface. When the temperature in a given area rose above its boiling point, hydrogen from the depths sometimes rose through cracks in the ice and formed pockets on the surface. That liquid hydrogen could be collected and used as fuel on the fly by vehicles traveling across it. A valley formed in the central mountain range, which the Denis called the crevice. It was where they built their industrial district. On the outer slopes of the mountains surrounding the crevice were a series of wharves and piers that extended out onto the tundra. The industrial district's centerpiece was a massive building that resembled an outsized aircraft hangar. The building was oriented along a fault line that offered relatively easy access down to the volcanic zone deep below. The Denis constructed huge pipes the diameter of entire rooms to tap that underground heat. The hot air piped up was used to produce steam and was blown through other pipes to buildings near the docks outside the valley. The building was said to have 2 levels. The upper level housed steam generators to produce electricity for the rest of the industrial district. The lower level had an area called a ready room, where guild delivery pilots waited for their next assignment. The ready room had maps where drilling rig locations were marked daily. Weather, terrain, and market reports were collected by the guild and posted on information boards. The guild operated the drilling rigs, so their ready rooms always had the most accurate information about them. There were 2 other ready rooms located in the crevice, along with the main one in the hangar. Elsewhere in the building was the production facility where power balls and fire marbles were made. Outside the industrial district, one could find 2 kinds of facilities. The first were the mobile drilling rigs, and the second were outpost towns set on islands and spurs of ground along the edge of the sea. The outposts had informal ready rooms in pubs that did what they could to mimic the guild ready rooms in the crevice. The outposts were unofficial and not associated with the Guild of Miners. Over the years, a number of merchants and mechanics had become frustrated with guild laws and restrictions on what they could do, and established the outposts as a place where one could find services that the guild would not provide. Those services included specialist mechanics who performed unique upgrades and modifications that were unavailable to guild members. In fact, guild members were not welcome in the outposts except in a life-threatening emergency. One mechanic who was mentioned in the documents found that that were found in the Age was a man named Yuta. He was said to be the go-to guy if you wanted a grappling hook maneuvering mod installed. It was also noted that if you didn't have a gift of fresh steaks for him when you showed up, he wouldn't give you the time of day. Travel and working conditions on the tundra were extremely hazardous. Not only did the people who ventured out onto it have to deal with bitter cold, there were near-permanent ice, sleet, hail, and electrical storms awaiting the incautious. And let's see. I'm taking a quick look at the chat. That's exactly right, Shiloh. He wrote, Guild Weather Report. Cold to damn cold today with a chance of death, hail, and lightning hell. Okay, the answer to the problem of rapid transport was a specialized vehicle called a sled. And let's see. And I just put up a sleds were fast. A base model of sled was capable of reaching 250 miles per hour, and properly customized ones could reach 500 miles per hour. Sleds could pull large tanks filled with marbonium from the drilling rigs to the factory docks in the industrial district. The faster the sled, the farther it could go to pick up a load and take it to the crevice before it became worthless. The sleds were hermetically sealed. The sleds had hermetically sealed cabins for the pilots, who only left the cabin when in port. Opening up a hatch or door was suicidal out on the tundra. Because of that, all sleds came equipped with a linking book to a safe age on a small shelf where it could be touched by the pilot's chin, an action known as a chin-out. If a sled was wrecked or became stuck, a chin-out before the cabin air froze was the only option for survival. Sled pilots were called runners, and came in two basic types, public and private. Both were paid the same way. Runners earned nutty, the base Dani currency, on a sliding scale that was calculated by how much marbonium they delivered, how fresh it was, and what grade it was. Public runners had guild taxes deducted from the payout before they received it. The payout was a transfer of funds to the runner's pradmnurati, which loosely translates as money stone. Money stones were the Dani version of what we might call a smart card. Public runners were members of the Guild of Miners and had a rank system that rated them according to their job performance. Licensed by the guild, they paid a guild tax on their operations, but in return were loaned guild-authorized sleds and had access to guild-approved modifications. They were also guaranteed a replacement sled if, through no fault of their own, their assigned sled was damaged or destroyed. They also had access to better facilities and priority information about which drilling rigs were going to need runners and what the weather conditions were. However, being a guild runner wasn't a guarantee of advancement or high profits. The guild expected their runners to be quick, safe, and efficient. Poor results would see the rank of the runner lowered, and important runs would be assigned to others. Private runners were adventurers who linked to the age to try and make a quick fortune. Since they were unlicensed, they had to purchase their own sleds and customize them when they could afford to. Because they were unlicensed and not guild members, they had no insurance and were second in line for news about rigs and weather unless they paid for the information. However, that also meant they didn't have to pay guild taxes, could keep whatever money they earned, and could take risks the guild runners were forbidden to take. Private runners were the rebels of Datahmnay, and they had their own hangouts in outpost town pubs where they waited for jobs to be announced. They were risk-takers who customized their own sleds and were noted for using modifications that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. But when they did, the results could be outstanding. In the end, the guild really didn't care who delivered marbonium or whether that person was a guild member or not. If a private runner could deliver marbonium fast and in good condition, he or she was paid the same as the public runners. Sleds weren't the only vehicles on Datahmnay. Another type was a privately owned vehicle called a truck that carried people and supplies between the industrial district and the outposts. Jamie is asking, wouldn't the lightning be dangerous to the sled? And the answer to that is very much yes, which is why weather was a very, very important subject. But I'll be covering that in just a moment. Backing up the runners were various support organizations. These included hotels, pubs, restaurants, stores, laundry services, and all the other things a person needs to live. But the mining industry had several service industries that existed mainly for their benefit. The most important was the weather service. Weathermen on Datahmnay first issued a report to the Guild of Miners, who passed it on to public runners via monitors and displays in the guild ready rooms. After they'd given the reports to the guild, the weathermen passed them on to a broadcaster who read the reports over a public radio station. The weather broadcast was played over speakers in the private runners' outpost hangouts and could be picked up via radio sets built into their sleds by runners who were out on the sea. However, there was a back door to the weather service, and a private runner could obtain reports almost as soon as the guild did if they were willing to pay for them. Many did, since up-to-date weather information could be the difference between life and death. The weather reports gave detailed information about wind direction and strength, the location of hydrogen gas pockets which runners use to replenish their fuel tanks, where the active storms were, the ice conditions, and anything else that might aid the runners in completing their contracts and surviving the climate. Another important service was provided by traffic controllers. Their job was to direct runners around icebergs and rivers and to provide them with the most efficient routes. The ice atop the sea was constantly changing, and without traffic controllers keeping an eye on the big picture, a runner could get lost, run out of fuel, or get into an accident that destroyed his sled. It's not stated, but I suspect that the traffic controllers were impartial and gave directions freely to anyone who was out on the tundra. After a chin-out, there were two options for the unfortunate runner to try and recoup some of his losses. Assuming the sled was recoverable, he or she could call for a guild salvage barge. The barges were a guild-run reclamation service that could be called upon by any pilot who had to chin out. It was free for guild runners. Private runners had to pay a small service fee. This was quite generous of the guild, but there was a drawback. There were only a small number of salvage barges, and there was always a waiting list. And you can pretty much bet that public runners were given a first priority. For runners who didn't want to deal with the guild salvage service, there were private merchants both in the crevice and at the outposts who ran their own salvage operations for wrecked sleds. They cost more than the guild barge, but the runner got faster service for the money. The private salvage service would get right on the job, and the runner would be back in business in relatively short order. I'm going to put up a couple more pictures here. The first one, this shows examples of two of the mining rigs. I don't know if I mentioned it, but the mining rigs are mobile. They don't stay in one spot. They will drill down through the ice to find a pocket of marbonium deep below, and if they found one, they would mine it until it ran dry. Then they would withdraw the drill, pack up, and move on and find another pocket of marbonium. Let's see, let me take a quick look back at the chat. My understanding, Shiloh, is that the weathermen were a separate service. They were not part of the Guild of Miners. If anything, they were probably part of another Denis guild. But the notes that I had to work from didn't go into any great detail on it. Let's see, the next picture that I have. Okay, this is a street in what is presumably one of the outposts. The outposts were normally placed in sheltered places so they weren't quite as cold and people could dare to walk outdoors. Let's see. Ivanka is asking, how do you spell the name of the age? I believe that the typical spelling is Dathnay. Whoops. I'm not quite sure how that picture got mixed in there, because that's not Datahmnay, that's Datahmnay. Okay. This picture is an overview of a few of the different kinds of sleds that you might see in the age. They were about... the guild sleds had some sort of standardization, but private sleds could take pretty much any form. And this is a truck, one of the public transports. Okay, and that's all the information that I have about Datahmnay. So, questions? Oh, excuse me, there was one thing that for some reason I don't recall mentioning. When you mine Marbonium, it's a volatile liquid. And what would happen is that when they brought it up to the surface and it was exposed to air, it would start deteriorating. That meant that it had to be taken from the mining rig to the factory in the shortest possible amount of time before it became worthless. And that's why the sleds had to be so fast. And again, when they mined the stuff, they would take it no matter what quality it was, because every last bit of it was valuable. So you had various grades of Marbonium to deal with. You had the distance that the mining rig was away from the crevice at that time to deal with. You had to deal with weather. You had to deal with the fact that your route was changing on a daily basis because of the ice. And in general, the whole thing was so complicated that it was no wonder that that they had to use a sliding scale to pay for the stuff. Jamie Marchant, do the sleds have heating? Absolutely. They had to. they were traveling through minus 200 Fahrenheit temperatures. Temperatures enough to where low enough to where hydrogen would lie in pools on the ground, and they had to stay inside those their sled cabins, because if they had opened up the hatch, they would have instantly frozen to death. That was why a wreck, which would cause you to become stationary, was such a disaster. It would if you became stuck, you would eventually run out of fuel, and that would mean that you would have no more heating, and the air inside the cabin of your sled would instantly freeze. So they definitely had to get, and that was why, of course, they always carried a linking book inside the sled. Let's see, what time is it? 12:30 my time. Okay, that only took a half hour to get through. Sounds like winters in Quebec, says Sky is Blue. Let's see, Shiloh. This is the most info on Denis economics we've had so far. Is there more economic info coming from the newly released stuff? This is the newly released stuff that I'm getting this from. And that was one of the things that I was the most excited about when I started writing this article. It's the fact that in most of what we know about Denis, there actually isn't an awful lot spoken or said about the daily lives of individuals. You get to read about the reigns of kings and other things like that. You get to read the stories in the notebooks about various ages, but you don't know how the average Joe in Denis got through his life. And this gives us a concrete glimpse at a segment of their society that was, I kind of put it akin to a frontier society. And that made it tremendously interesting. Okay, I'm going to be taking a moment right now because I'm going to be switching to the next area I'm going to talk about. And to show the slideshow, I'm going to have to re-import my webcam and microphone, so you will not be hearing me for a moment. Okay, now to get that. Now let's see if we can get that guy's fat head out of the way. Here we go, that'll do. Okay, now let's see. The next age that we are going to be talking about is the age of Pento. I've covered a little bit of the history of the Pento as it related to Denis before, but I'll be going into a lot more detail this time. So let's go ahead and get started. The DRC appears to have discovered a linking book to the age of Pento sometime in the year 2000. When they conducted an initial survey of the age, the landscape they found was bleak and barren. In September of the year 2000, the DRC suspended the age of Pento in Phase 1 because of a recommendation from Dr. Ikaro Kodama. His note simply read, Pento, 9-2000, unstable resources, K. Unstable resources probably meant that they didn't have the money, manpower, and time to continue exploring it after the first survey. When the DRC returned to the cavern after their first restoration attempt ran into funding shortfalls, they held another vote on September 30th of 2006 and unanimously sustained the suspension of Pento with a note that they would reassess the age at a later date. That day never came because their financial backer withdrew from the project and the DRC was disbanded. The age of Pento consists of a seemingly endless windy plain with steep-sided chasm-like canyons carved into it that left natural arches bridging it in places. The surface of the plain was harsh and bleak with little to sustain life. The people of the age lived in the canyons where they had shelter from the constant winds, but even there the conditions were difficult and over time only grew worse. Let's go ahead and bring up another picture of a canyon on Pento. The age, as the DRC found it, centered around a half square mile playing field used for a ritual sport that involved navigating an obstacle course that was partly on the surface and partly underground. And here's an overview of the playing field. The object of the game was to carry fire from 3 different start points to a finish point without the flames being blown out by the strong gusts of wind in the age. It was a cooperative sport, and 2 runners would pass the flame back and forth between their torches to keep it burning. The playing field was made up of a maze of trenches, buttes, pillars, steps, and caves. Okay. This next picture I'm bringing up shows a ground level view of part of the playing field, along with a figure standing in the entrance to one of the caves. The playing field included an arena. Whoops. Yeah, there. That was the right picture. Okay. And here's a picture of its exterior. The DRC thought that the arena looked like a gigantic apple. And that was only reinforced when they got inside and found that the center of the arena looked a bit like an apple core. This picture is part of the obstacle course that torch runners had to overcome. In it, you can see in this illustration, you can see figures having to climb up the rock structure. And here's a bit more of the obstacle course. Jamie comments that someone couldn't think of an age and looked at Macintosh. This picture shows some of the terrain in the inhabitable part of the age. According to available documentation, the people of Pento believed in two gods, a god of wind and a god of fire. In the beginning, the two were good friends and worked together to create the world. When the time came to populate the world, fire belched out burning embers and wind cooled them off and brought them to the ground where they transformed into people. But the gods' friendship was sorely tested after the creation of humanity. One day a woman was born to the people whose beauty was immediately noticed by the god of wind and the god of fire, and both wanted her for their own. For 20 years, fire and wind fought for the woman's attention, and as a result destroyed most of Pento with windstorms and blazing heat and fire. As they contended, a young warrior the people also decided that he wanted the woman for his own, and he claimed that neither wind nor fire had a right to her. As a result, war broke out between fire, wind, and the young man over the woman. The young man took the woman and tried to bring her to a place where neither fire nor wind could take her from him. To get there, they had to cross the high plateau of their world where both fire and wind could easily see them. It did not take longer than one day atop the plateau for the warrior to realize that they could never make it across. Fire tried to kill him by spewing down balls of molten rock from the sky, and wind hurled strong gusts at him, trying to knock him off the precipices that surrounded him. The young man decided that he and the woman would have to navigate the caves under the surface of the world in order to escape. However, once in the caves, fire ceased to burn, and the pitch-black darkness made it impossible to see where they were going. The young man left the woman in the caves for safety and made a torch from a stick and rags. He then climbed back up to the plateau where he managed to capture some of the fire still burning from the balls of rock that fire had hurled at him earlier. The light from the torch provided light to navigate through the caves. They had escaped the reach of fire, but the trials were not over. Wind could still reach him in the caves and attacked him relentlessly, constantly trying to extinguish the fire of his torch. To aid against losing their only source of light, the warrior returned to the plateau and made another torch for the woman. The pair then traveled through the caves, passing their torches back and forth when one was blown out or one of them needed both hands to climb. By cooperating, the young man and woman were able to find their way safely through the caves and away from where fire and wind could harm them. Once they were in a place where they could rest, the woman told the warrior that there was an even safer place that they could go. While wooing her, fire and wind had told her some of their secrets. One of those secrets was that gathering the three sacred fires together that were burning on the plateau would allow them to escape to another world where neither fire nor wind lived. It took much effort and no little risk, but working together, the warrior and the woman were able to collect the three fires on their torches and bring them to the designated place. However, it was for nothing. The fires were burning together, but no doorway to another world opened. But they still had a happy end to their story. Greatly impressed by his courage and resourcefulness, fire and wind both acknowledged that the man had earned the right to take the woman as his wife. They both also realized that while chasing the young man, they had become friends again and that they had thoroughly enjoyed the contest. Fire and wind made a pact with the man and woman that day. If they would convince their people to make the contest a regular event and race through the caverns trying to collect the fires and running from the wind, the gods would allow the young man and woman to become gods themselves and rule over the world beside them. From that day on, the people of Pento cherished the tradition of racing through the windy caves, carrying lit torches to the goal to please the gods, which now included two of their own. And let's see, do I have... Okay, let's back. Oops. Okay, this picture here I had skipped over a bit earlier, but this was the goal of the race. You were to bring the 3 sacred fires to this pillar where you would light beacons, and that would be the end of the contest. And let's go ahead and switch back here for the moment. Okay. Now, I have a few more pictures that I may show you later, but they're nothing important. What we're going to talk about now is the history of Pento and Datahmnay. The meeting of Pento and Datahmnay wasn't a tale of peace and cooperation like the race was. Far from it. It was a tale of war and ultimately of cruel expediency. The aftermath of their meeting affected Datahmnay's society for millennia. It had great influence on their art, their medicine, and their relations with Autotanti peoples in other ages. And as many another story of war and violence, it began with religious differences. It was during the reign of King Corin, that the story of the clash between Pento and Datahmnay began. A religious cult who called themselves the Judges of Yavo believed that they were called to exercise judgment over the rest of Datahmnay, and that only they truly knew the will of Yavo. They existed for a long time in obscurity, but that was to change. In the late part of the 13th Datahmnay century, a leader named Eris was raised among them, and he craved power. In the year 1303, he was able to gather the resources to attain it. In that year, a writer guildsman vanished under mysterious conditions. A few days later, a number of blank books and bottles of ink disappeared from the stocks of the guilds of books and ink makers. Corin issued orders for increased security among the guilds and launched a massive search for the missing writer and the books and ink, but none of them were found. It would later be revealed that the writer was a member of the judges and that they had hidden him. The judges stole the writing materials and had their man lead a project to create illegal ages. They were deliberately breaking Datahmnay law by writing ages with native peoples in order to find some that they could control and force to go to war for them. 17 years later, in Datahmnay year 1320, the judges wrote an age called Pento that had the people they needed. The people of the age were a warrior culture living in a world that was becoming less and less able to support them. The Pento were too fierce for the judges to force them to fight, but they had something that Pento wanted desperately: the ability to write a new age where the Pento could live and prosper. By promising to create a new home with plentiful resources, the judges had the army they'd been searching for, and better yet, it was an army that would willingly go to war on their behalf. In Datahmnay year 1323, the judges and their Pento allies were ready. Corin's wife had gone into labor and was about to give birth to his first son. While it's not stated in Corin's notebook, it was entirely possible that people would have gathered in a large crowd waiting outside the palace for news of a successful delivery. In the hustle and bustle, and with everyone so distracted, it would have been relatively easy for a party of the judges in Pento to infiltrate the island and launch an assault on the palace, and that's what they did. When informed about the invasion, Corin ordered his family to be evacuated from the palace, as guards fought to hold their ground against the surprise attack. Together they rushed down to the harbor, there to take a boat to the Denis city, where a linking book to a private age was waiting for them. The small boat was able to fit in the narrow gap in the King's Arch, which was a more direct route than using the main entrance tunnel and going around the side of the island. While traveling through the King's Arch, it said that Corin's wife delivered their son, Alcindar. After seeing his family through the book to safety, Corin remained behind to command the combined forces of the Denis City Guard, Denis' small standing army, and the maintainers who were fighting the judges. Pento warriors proved to be a formidable opponent, and the city grew more and more dangerous. The judges destroyed the buildings that housed loyalists and murdered ordinary citizens whenever they caught them. In response, Corin poured money into the city guard and the regular army, but it seemed to be too little too late. He led the fight for 29 years until Denis year 1352. That year, Corin's luck ran out, and he was caught and assassinated by a group of Pento warriors led by judges. His death threw the city into chaos, and to the judges, it seemed only a matter of time until their victory would be complete. Having been born the year of the invasion, Alcindar was 29 years old and living with his mother in their refuge age when his uncle arrived to tell him that his father had been killed. However, Alcindar didn't rush to the city upon hearing the news. His uncle apparently advised him to hold off and devised a plan instead. With a few advisors who kept him updated about the progress of the war, Alcindar did as his uncle had suggested and formulated a strategy to turn the war in Denis' favor. His uncle, who was a member of the Guild of Linguists, was translating the Pento language and learning as much as he could about them. While that was happening, the judges claimed victory and assumed control of the Denis government, although the fighting wasn't over by any means. Even as the Denis military force continued resistance, the judges led their Pento allies into some of the more important ages of the Denis Empire. Alcindar continued to receive intelligence briefings from his uncle and waited for the right time to make a move. A few weeks later, the waiting appeared to pay off. A report arrived that the judges had killed the leader of the Pento. It stated that the judges were afraid that that man had grown too powerful and was out of their control. This had an unexpected consequence. The leader had two sons named Makar and Timawa, and had not declared which was to be his heir. His death caused the sons to begin fighting for the right of succession, and that sparked a civil war within the Pento army. The Pento concentrated on their own conflict and ignored orders from the judges. That left the judges suddenly with only their own members as a military force, and they were spread out in the different ages they invaded. That left the Denis city with very few soldiers left who were openly loyal to the judges. The Denis public apparently knew Alcindar was biding his time. They remembered the prophecy of Urpa, and it seemed to them that they were witnessing its words coming to life. Only the stone, while they pass beneath, listens to his cries and comforts her fear. Only the arch welcomes the reign of the Great One who guides us. Those were the words of Urpa. The Dini all knew that Alcindar had been born directly underneath the Arch of the Kings, which was a replica of a monument on Gartnay built just in case the prophecy was meant for Denis. They believed that the next line, "A new people, people of light, will bring great havoc to the dark," was a foretelling of the Pento invasion, and that the line, "He remains hidden while another sits on his throne," was an obvious reference to the leader of the judges. As the people awaited the time when Alcindar made his move, they only grew more willing to fight for him when he did. That time arrived 15 weeks after the death of King Corin. Alcindar, leading a small detachment of soldiers who had guarded him and his mother in the refuge, linked back to the Denis city. For the first time in his life, Alcindar saw with his own eyes the places he'd read about in so many reports and whose maps he'd studied with his advisors. Marching down to the docks, he and a few of his soldiers boarded a small boat, similar to the one he and his mother had fled in, and sailed to the island directly through the King's Arch on their way to retake the palace. With so few judges available to defend it, the task of occupying the palace was relatively easy. When Alcindar first arrived and began his march to the palace, several of the soldiers followed orders they'd been given and split off to gather the loyalists who were still fighting the judges, and began to establish safe zones for refugees. As they did, they were joined by common Denis who had witnessed Alcindar's arrival, and this greatly increased the number of fighters available for Alcindar to command. After Alcindar established his base of operations in the palace and reorganized the Denis military forces, he sent a messenger to the Pento faction that supported Makar, stating that he wished to negotiate a deal with him. Alcindar's proposal was that he would help Makar defeat his brother if, in return, the Pento would abandon the judges and retreat to their homes peacefully. Makar agreed on the condition that Alcindar would write them a new homage to return to. A treaty was signed between them, and in the year 1376, Alcindar led a military expedition to the Pento Age. Denis history called the resulting battle the Battle of the Great King, and it was a total victory for the alliance of Makar and Alcindar. Makar turned over 2 of the leaders of the judges to Alcindar, and 3 more would be found in the Denis city. All 5 were sent to prison ages, and the books were burned. A number of influential Denis had demanded that they be put to death, but Alcindar refused for unstated reasons. A few weeks later, Alcindar was crowned, and it was said that, quote-unquote, "Not one on Denis did not attend the event. Our cheering was as loud as thunder, and our pride as solid as the arch through which he had sailed." That should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't over yet. Alcindar didn't trust the Pento in general, and Makar in particular, so he secretly worked with the guilds of writers and healers on a biological weapon aimed at them just in case it might be needed in the future. The linking books between Denis and the new Pento Age were left in place because Alcindar insisted on continuing contact with them. His advisors argued that the books should be destroyed, but he didn't listen to them. In Denis year 1466, Alcindar's distrust and the advisors' fears proved to be well-founded. Makar came to the palace via linking books that the judges had given to him, and he kept hidden from the rest of the Denis. It's not said why, but he personally killed Alcindar's wife and the 2 sons they'd had together. And infuriated Alcindar faced Makar himself and killed him in what records described as an astounding battle. 2 days later, and once again against the advice of his court, Alcindar ordered the release of the biological weapon into the new Pento age, and that quickly became a plague. The records do not say how the plague was released, but the result was as gratifying to the weapon's creators as it was horrible. The entire population of New Pento died within 3 days of it being set loose among them. That it was not so quick, but that was not so quickly that it forestalled an unplanned tragedy. Most of the Pento realized that a sickness had been set upon them and linked to a number of other ages in attempts to escape. They infected numerous other cultures before dying and caused devastating loss of life wherever they had gone. Having been designed not to, the sickness did not affect those of Dni heritage. However, when they learned about the weapon, the Guild of Chemists began to fear that it might mutate into something that could affect Dni. When the Dni public heard about the plague that was spreading through the empire, they blamed the Pento for the devastation since they had no knowledge of their own government's creation of the disease. In response, all of the books to which the Pento had access were gathered together to be burned. 4 years later, in Dni year 1500, Alcindar called for a gathering of his people to inform them of the truth. In the speech he gave, he admitted that he had created the plague and ordered its release. At the end of the speech, he asked to be summoned into the temple of the great king with all of the books to infected ages, along with any books that linked the Dni to their past on Garternay. A year later, as he requested, Alcindar was sealed into the temple along with a large but unknown number of books. One of those books was probably their linking books to Turanay, an age to which most of the Rhone had moved when they abandoned Garternay. The story of the Dni and Pento simmered for a time during the reign of Solath, Alcindar's successor, but it was far from over. In Dni year 2015, a man named Gan took the throne at an age of 144. He never got a chance to do much to distinguish his reign, thanks to his grandmother, a woman named Jolatha. 6 months after Gan's coronation, Dni people began falling sick. The sickness developed into an epidemic and was soon declared a plague. In their attempts to identify and treat the illness, the Guild of Healers discovered that the plague was a mutation of the disease that Alcindar had created to destroy the Pento. The evolved version caused a swift death by heart failure in the very young and the very old, and adults had their life expectancies cut by half. Even worse, it caused massive infertility, so the birth rate among the Dni dropped drastically. Once word spread that the plague was similar to what the Great King had created, the Dni people put most of the blame for the illness on Alcindar. What very few knew was that Jolatha, Gan's grandmother, had ordered that the tomb where Alcindar had been sealed should be reopened because she wanted books that he'd taken with him. Those who knew about the breaking of the seal evidently kept their mouths shut, because as far as the public was concerned, the plague was Alcindar's fault. Despite the low fertility rates, Gan managed to have a son named Benishirin in 2050. When Gan died and left his son the throne, it was to rule over a population that was slowly dying both physically and emotionally with no cure in sight. Benishirin took the throne in 2070 at the age of 20, making him the youngest Dni king ever. Even by surface standards, he was young, untrained, and too inexperienced to become a king. He showed his immaturity many times during his short reign. He was easily swayed in his religious views, sometimes begging Yahweh for healing, and other times calling upon the tree, a central figure in several cults. Instead of supporting the guilds of healers and chemists, who were desperately searching for a cure, he publicly denounced them with accusations of shallow efforts and failing their own people. As the adult population continued to die, the number of children born decreased tremendously. Ben-Ashurin died in the year 2193 at the age of 143 without siring any heirs. There were so few children being born by then that Ben-Ashurin couldn't find a suitable person to leave the throne to, even among his court. The only choice left for him was to appoint his 179-year-old uncle as the crown prince. It was later deemed a miracle that he made that choice because, some dared to say, Ben-Ashurin was, quote-unquote, far too ignorant to choose an heir that made so much sense on his own. And so Ben-Ashurin's uncle Himelin took the throne in 2193 at the age of 179. Himelin was a guild master of the Guild of Healers before his coronation. It was later claimed that he took the throne with rage in his heart and fire in his mouth. Disgusted and furious about the way Ben-Ashurin had aroused negative public opinions of his guild, he made it his mission to find a cure for the plague. It was the opinion of historians that he exercised more power and authority in the first week of his rule than his nephew had in his entire life. Himelin was convinced that a cure must lay in a body of records called the Books of Old. If Denis healers had been able to craft the original plague, then they must have gotten the knowledge to do so from somewhere or recorded their work. So he began pressing for the Healers Guild to look through the books long before his coronation. That effort was hindered by Ben-Ashurin, who was inexplicably hesitant to allow the healers to read them. When Himelin became king, that immediately changed, and the healers were given full access to all the research material available. Things came to a head when Himelin contracted the plague and became extremely ill in the year 2255. Most of his advisors and healers thought that he was about to die, despite everything that the guild was trying to do to prevent it. Then a miracle appeared in the form of a young nurse sent to take care of Himelin. Her name was Lalin, and as time passed, Himelin found himself, in his own words, living just to see her one more time. Lalin must have felt the same way, and their newfound love forged a will to live in Himelin that the disease could not extinguish. Himelin recovered his health, and right up until the day he died, he praised Lalin as the reason he survived. If that wasn't enough, there was another excellent reason why Lalin became one of the most revered women in Denis history. 2 years after Himelin recovered, she was searching through the books of old and found hints about where more of them had been kept. A few months later, she was instrumental in tracking down the Book of Bereni, a Healers Guild treatise that Himelin had always wanted to find but could not. Once the book was in the hands of the guild, it was just 6 years later, in the year 2262, that a team of healers led by Guild Master Jason announced that the Pento plague was finally cured. The announcement sparked tremendous celebrations, the like of which had never been seen before in the caverns. That day was also notable because it was the day that Himelin and Lalin were married in a grand ceremony. The romance of Himelin and Lalin became a classic of Denis art, music, and plays, and the date of their wedding was forever after the most favorite day for young Denis brides to have their own marriage ceremonies in the hopes that their lives would be filled with similar love. That was the end of the Pento plague in the Denis Empire, but yet again, it wasn't the end of the story. Himmelin's successor, Nagin, took the throne in 2356 at the age of 86. In 2397, the Myst Theatre Company hosted the first play written by a playwright named Sura. The play dealt with the Pento War and the great king Alcindar. In addition to earning praise from King Nagin, it ended up being sold out for 3 straight weeks and marked not only the start of theater as a popular form in entertainment among the Denis, it was also the first use of the Pento War as a subject. The history of the war would go on to become one of the most frequent themes in Denis art. In 2408, a 33-year-old musician named Aram began selling out concert halls and would become one of the most notable musicians in Denis history. His music was often about the great king, and both praised and satirized him, sometimes to the point of outright ridicule. Nagin enjoyed his work as well, saying that it was wonderful that people were able to express their true feelings in such wonderful displays of art. The final part of the story of Denis and the Pento War was to come after the Denis Empire died. In the early 19th century on the surface, Atrus, his Averonese assistants, and the Denis who had survived the fall of the empire, and whom Atrus had found and reunited, discovered the linking book to Terani, which had been sealed in the tomb of the great king. Linking through it, they discovered the descendants of the Rhone who had moved there, and they were dismayed to learn that the Rhone had become the master class of an empire of slaves. While it's not said exactly what the illness was, the Denis were carriers of intestinal microbes that spread to the people of Terani and killed nearly 99% of them in a matter of weeks. The Denis were immune to the microbes, but their Terranese cousins were not, having never been exposed to anything like it. Given how suddenly and thoroughly the Denis struck and killed the Terranese, I strongly suspect that was the last strike of the Pento plague, and showed that the Denis created to destroy New Pento still had the ability to enact genocide on a grand scale thousands of years after it had been created. So it is with the death of the slave masters of Terani that the story of Denis and Pento comes to a conclusion. But perhaps the ending has not yet been written. Okay, and that's the end of the material that I have prepared for today. Do we have any questions that I missed while I was reading my notes? That depends a lot. When you look at the Kadish's vault, you will find spears, swords, and armor and shields there. But in the books, it's mentioned that they had firearms of various kinds. By the way, that question was from Jamie. What did the Denis use in their wars? So, it was probably a mix of different kinds of weapons, but one presumes that they actually did have guns. Let's see, what time is it anyway? Only 1:18. So I'm a half hour ahead of schedule at this point. No problem. And I didn't really have anything else formally prepared for today, so I am going to call it at this point. Hoped you enjoyed all the stories that I had to tell. As far as the rest of the day, this was the schedule for today. The only other event that I know about that's supposed to happen today is karaoke at 1600 key time in the New Messengers pub. Arte's story night apparently was canceled for the day, according to Minnesota. Thank you all for showing up and putting up with me on a day when all we ever did really was sit around. Our next tour date is going to be, it looks like the 9th of October. And we will be putting on our normal a normal tour that time. Where can I get the images that Cyan released? I'd like to see them. I'm not sure currently where you could get the intangibles documents that I use as source material for these two lectures. There is a website, Chiso something or other, where I get the stuff that I use for my backgrounds. One of these days I'm going to have to get notes on where those things are. Chiso something or other. Yeah, I'm just not quite really prepared to answer that question. Oh well. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream now, and I look forward to seeing you all again next month for our regularly scheduled tour. Bye-bye, everyone.